June 12, 2014, 10:32 a.m. Pinewood Studios, London. Harrison Ford is standing inside the Millennium Falcon when he hears the sound that will haunt him for the rest of his life, the mechanical whir of a hydraulic door closing behind him at full speed. He has less than 2 seconds to move. He doesn't make it. 7,000 pounds of steel crush his left leg with the force of a speeding truck. The scream that follows echoes across stage 4 and stops production on the biggest movie in the galaxy. But to understand why Harrison Ford was willing to risk everything on that set, you need to know what happened 3 hours earlier in makeup trailer B7. At 7:15 a.m., Harrison Ford sat in the makeup chair while Jenny Shirkor, the same woman who had transformed him into Indiana Jones 30 years earlier, worked on the scars and age lines that would make Han Solo look like a man who had lived through decades of galactic war. Harrison was unusually quiet. Jenny had worked with him long enough to know when something was bothering him. "You all right, Harry?" she asked, using the nickname only his oldest friends were allowed to use. Harrison looked at himself in the mirror. At 71, the face staring back showed every year, every stunt, every moment of his legendary career. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be. His reflexes had slowed. The night before, his doctor had delivered news that every aging action star dreads. His insurance physical had revealed decreased mobility, slower reaction times, and early signs of arthritis in his left knee. Jenny, Harrison said quietly, "What do you do when the world expects you to be someone you're not sure you can be anymore?" Jenny stopped applying makeup and looked at him in the mirror. "You be that person anyway until you remember who you really are." It was advice that would nearly get Harrison Ford killed. At 8:45 a.m., Harrison walked onto stage 4, where the Millennium Falcon cockpit had been recreated in perfect detail. Every switch, every panel, every surface was exactly as it had been in 1977 when he first sat in that pilot's seat as a struggling 35-year-old actor who just needed a paycheck. Now 37 years later he was back, but everything had changed. Director J.J. Abrams was setting up the shot when props master Dan Sudik approached Harrison with a concerned expression. Sudik had worked on action movies for 20 years. He knew when something wasn't right. "Harrison, we've had some issues with the hydraulic door system this week," Sudik said. "It's been sticking, closing faster than it should. Maybe we should use a stunt double for this sequence, just to be safe." Harrison's jaw tightened. A stunt double. At 71, those words felt like a death sentence, an admission that Harrison Ford was no longer capable of being Harrison Ford. "Dan," Harrison said with that familiar half-smile that had charmed audiences for decades, "I've been walking through doors for 71 years. I think I can handle one more." It was the first warning Harrison Ford ignored that day. It wouldn't be the last. At 9:30 a.m., the time during the first rehearsal, the hydraulic door slammed shut 6 inches sooner than it was supposed to. If Harrison had been in position, it would have caught him. Assistant director Tommy Harper immediately called a halt to filming. "That's it," Harper announced to the crew. "We're shutting down until maintenance can fix this system properly." But Harrison Ford wasn't just any actor on this set. He was Han Solo. He was Indiana Jones. He was the star whose presence determined whether this movie lived or died. When Harrison Ford spoke, people listened. "Tommy," Harrison called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been making movies since before some of the crew members were born. "I appreciate the caution, but we're burning daylight here. Let's reset and go again." Harper hesitated. Safety protocols existed for a reason, but this was Harrison Ford asking. This was the man who had done his own stunts in Raiders of the Lost Ark, who had improvised some of the greatest action sequences in movie history, who never said no to a challenge. "Are you sure, Harrison? That door is heavy. If it catches you, it won't catch me," Harrison said with complete confidence. "I know when to move." It was the second warning Harrison Ford ignored that day. The third would come just minutes before disaster struck. At 10:25 a.m., as the crew prepared for the final take, mechanical engineer Sarah Collins approached Harrison with a tablet showing the hydraulic system readings. Collins was one of the few people on set who wasn't intimidated by Harrison's legend. She cared more about safety than star power. "Mr. Ford," she said, showing him the data, These pressure readings are inconsistent. The door is closing with 30% more force than it should. I strongly recommend postponing this shot until we can recalibrate the entire system." Harrison looked at the numbers on the screen. The technical jargon meant nothing to him, but the concern in Colin's eyes was clear. For a moment, he wavered. Maybe they were right. Maybe the smart thing was to wait, to be cautious, to act his age. But then Harrison thought about the young cast members watching him. Daisy Ridley, 22 years old, hanging on his every word. John Boyega, 22 years old, looking at him like he was meeting his childhood hero. Oscar Isaac, 35 years old, the age Harrison had been when he first played Han Solo. They expected him to be fearless. They expected him to be the hero they had grown up watching. And Harrison Ford had never in 4 decades of making movies let fear make his decisions for him. "Sarah," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "Han Solo doesn't wait for perfect conditions. Neither do I." It was the third and final warning Harrison Ford ignored that day. In 7 minutes, he would pay the price for that decision in ways that would change his life forever. But first, you need to understand what else was happening in Harrison's life that made him so desperate to prove he was still the man the world remembered. The night before the accident, Harrison had received a phone call from his agent, Patricia McQueenie, who had represented him for over 30 years. The conversation had been brief and devastating. "Harry," she had said in the gentle tone she reserved for delivering bad news, "I need to be honest with you about something. There are people at Disney who think you're too old for this role. They're questioning whether a 71-year-old man can still be believable as an action hero. They're watching this film very carefully." The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. Too old. Those 2 words contained his deepest fear, the nightmare that woke him up in the middle of the night. After 4 decades of playing the toughest men in cinema, was he finally being told his time was up? "What are you telling me, Pat?" Harrison had asked. "I'm telling you that this might be your last chance to prove them wrong. This might be your last chance to be Han Solo." Those words were echoing in Harrison's mind as he walked toward the Millennium Falcon for what everyone thought would be a simple scene. But for Harrison Ford, nothing was simple anymore. This wasn't just about walking through a door. This was about proving that age hadn't defeated him. That the hero the world loved was still alive inside his aging body. At 10:32 a.m., J.J. Abrams called action for the final time. Harrison Ford, dressed in Han Solo's signature vest and boots, walked confidently toward the Falcon's entrance. His movements were fluid, practiced, showing no sign of the arthritis that made his knee ache every morning. This was Harrison Ford at his most heroic, channeling 4 decades of movie stardom into one simple walk across a set. The cameras rolled. The crew held their breath, and the hydraulic door began to close. Later, investigators would determine that the door closed 2.3 seconds faster than it should have. At normal speed, Harrison would have cleared the threshold easily. But this wasn't normal speed. This was a mechanical failure happening in real time, and Harrison Ford was directly in its path. Harrison saw the door coming. His aging reflexes, slowed by 7 decades of life, told him to move. But his mind, still sharp and defiant, told him he could make it. He had made it through 1,000 similar moments in 1,000 different movies. He would make it through this one too. He didn't. The hydraulic door caught Harrison's left leg at mid-calf with 7,000 pounds of crushing force. The sound was indescribable. Part mechanical clang, part organic crunch, part human scream. Harrison went down instantly, his leg trapped beneath the massive steel door, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. "Get it off me!" Harrison shouted, his voice filled with pain unlike anything the crew had ever heard from him. "Get it off me now." The set erupted into chaos. J.J. Abrams screamed for the emergency stop. Props master Dan Sudik frantically worked the controls, but the hydraulic system was locked in place by its own malfunction. Mechanical engineer Sarah Collins ran toward the control panel, her worst fears realized in the most devastating way possible. Harrison was pinned, unable to move, his leg being crushed with every second that passed. The pain was beyond description, a white-hot agony that shot through his entire body and made him wonder, for the first time in his life, if this was how it would end. But even in that moment of excruciating pain, Harrison Ford showed why he was different from every other actor in Hollywood. Instead of screaming for help, instead of panicking, he looked directly at J.J. Abrams and said something that would become legend on movie sets for years to come. "J.J.," he said, through gritted teeth, his voice steady despite the agony, "whatever you do, don't let them shut down production. People are counting on this movie." J.J. Abrams would later say that in 40 years of making movies, he had never seen anything like it. The man with his leg crushed beneath a ton of steel, worried not about his own life, but about the people whose jobs depended on the film being completed. That wasn't acting. That was character. It took the emergency crew 12 agonizing minutes to free Harrison from the door. 12 minutes during which he remained conscious, alert, and somehow still in command of the situation. When a young production assistant started crying at the sight of his mangled leg, Harrison actually managed a weak smile. "Hey," he said to her gently, "it's just a flesh wound. I've had worse." He hadn't had worse. The injury was devastating. His left leg was fractured in 3 places. The muscle damage was severe. At 71 years old, the recovery would be long, difficult, and potentially incomplete. But Harrison Ford was already planning his comeback before the paramedics had even arrived. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Harrison grabbed J.J. Abrams' hand with surprising strength. "Promise me something, J.J.," he whispered. "Don't replace me. I'll be back." "Han Solo isn't finished yet." J.J. nodded, tears in his eyes. "I promise, Harrison, we'll wait for you." "Good," Harrison said, as the ambulance doors closed, "because I'm not done being a hero." At the hospital, doctors gave Harrison news that would have ended the career of a lesser man. The fractures were complex. The soft tissue damage was extensive. At his age, full recovery was unlikely. They couldn't guarantee he would walk without a limp, let alone return to the physical demands of action filmmaking. Dr. Michael Stevens, the orthopedic surgeon who performed Harrison's operation, later described it as one of the most challenging cases of his career. The damage was severe, Dr. Stevens recalled. For a man of 71, this type of injury often means the end of physical activity. I had to be honest with him about what he was facing. But when Dr. Stevens delivered the sobering news about Harrison's prognosis, he received a response he would never forget. "Doc," Harrison said, from his hospital bed, his leg wrapped in a massive cast, "you don't know Han Solo very well. He doesn't give up. Neither do I." What happened over the next 6 months became the stuff of Hollywood legend. Harrison Ford, at 71 years old, attacked his recovery with the same intensity he had brought to movie sets for 4 decades. He worked with physical therapists 5 days a week. He pushed through pain that would have broken men half his age. He was determined not just to walk again, but to walk like the hero millions of fans needed him to be. The turning point came 3 months into his recovery. Harrison was struggling through a particularly difficult physical therapy session when his 8-year-old grandson, Liam, came to visit. The boy looked at his grandfather's scarred, weakened leg and asked the question that changed everything. "Grandpa," Liam said with the innocent directness that only children possess, "are you still going to be Han Solo? Or are you too hurt now?" Harrison looked at his grandson and realized something profound. This wasn't about proving he was still young. This wasn't about competing with actors a fraction of his age. This was about honoring a character that had meant everything to millions of people around the world. Han Solo deserved better than a broken-down old man feeling sorry for himself. "Liam," Harrison said, pulling his grandson close, "being a hero isn't about not getting hurt, it's about getting back up after you do get hurt. And I'm not done getting back up." 6 months after the accident that nearly ended his career, Harrison Ford walked back onto the Star Wars set at Pinewood Studios. He was still in pain. He walked with a slight limp that he tried to hide, but he was there, ready to work, ready to finish what he had started. The entire crew, 200 people, spontaneously burst into applause when they saw him. Grown men cried. Daisy Ridley later said it was the most inspiring moment of her entire career. J.J. Abrams walked up to Harrison and shook his hand. "Welcome back, Han." Harrison looked around at the faces of the crew members who had waited for him, who had believed in him, who had never doubted he would return. "It's good to be back," he said simply. Now let's make a movie. The final irony of Harrison Ford's accident is that it made him a better Han Solo. The slight stiffness in his movements, the occasional wince of pain, the careful way he carried himself, it all fit perfectly with an aging smuggler who had lived through decades of adventure and danger. The injury that almost ended his career actually enhanced his performance. When The Force Awakens was released in December 2015, critics praised Harrison's portrayal of an older Han Solo. They called it his most nuanced performance in years, noting the depth and weariness he brought to the character. What they didn't know was that every scene was a triumph over pain, every line delivered through sheer force of will. The trapdoor door that nearly killed Harrison Ford's career was eventually replaced with a safer electronic system. But J.J. Abrams kept the original door as a reminder of what real courage looks like. He had a small plaque made that read, "The door that couldn't stop Harrison Ford." Today, Harrison Ford carries the scars of that June day in 2014. His left leg still aches when the weather changes. He walks with a slight limp that he tries to hide from photographers. But he doesn't regret ignoring those 3 safety warnings. He doesn't regret pushing through the pain to finish the film. "That accident taught me something important," Harrison said in a rare interview 6 months after the film's release. "Being tough isn't about avoiding injury. It's about what you do after you get injured. Han Solo would have finished the job, so I finished the job. So I finished the job." The accident also changed how Hollywood views aging action stars. Harrison's refusal to be replaced, his determination to complete the film despite his injury, proved that experience and character matter more than youth and agility. Studios now think twice before writing off older actors, and safety protocols on sets have been significantly improved. But perhaps the most important lesson of Harrison Ford's darkest day is this: heroes aren't defined by their ability to avoid danger. They're defined by their response to it. When that hydraulic door closed on Harrison's leg, it could have closed on his career, his legacy, and his identity as the greatest action hero of all time. Instead, Harrison Ford chose to get back up. He chose to walk through that door again, even if it hurt, even if he was scared, even if everyone would have understood if he had given up. That's not just the story of a movie set accident. That's the story of what separates true heroes from everyone else. That's the story of Harrison Ford. Not the character he plays on screen, but the man he is when the cameras stop rolling and the real test begins. The day Harrison Ford nearly lost his leg was the day he proved that being Han Solo was never about the stunts or the swagger. It was about the courage to keep going when everything tells you to quit. It was about being the hero people need, even when you're not sure you can be the hero you used to be. And on June 12, 2014, at 10:32 a.m., when 7,000 pounds of steel tried to end the legend of Harrison Ford, they learned what audiences had known for 40 years. You can't stop a real hero. You can only make him stronger.